Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 132nd episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this video, I'll be talking about the origins of life. Now, I've touched on this, I think, across the series here and there, but here I'll just do one single video that digs into this question because, I watch other channels also, and I really like Kurt Jamal's channel on theories of everything. And, he has some guests here that talk a lot about science, consciousness, and all that stuff. But I find that on some topics, there is some confusion because of this assumption that the past had a similar form to the form that we're experiencing now. Now, that is something that comes up time and again in my videos, is to distinguish between substance and form. Form being, the aspect things take from our vantage point, our interface, let's say, as humans. Because, of course, the reality as we perceive it is just an interface. Or a sort of symbolic representation of something deeper, just like a computer interface is a symbolic representation for interactions with ones and zeros and ones, right? And this is the biggest problem, is when we're dealing with the origins of life, we're trying to find out, like, this living cell, the first living cell and all that stuff in it. And we're thinking, okay, so life must have emerged out of several compounds, like certain chemicals, maybe certain, physical, maybe certain conditions in terms of physics. Maybe we'll look at it from the biology perspective or geology, whatever. But the problem is, doing this is the same as trying to, you have like your desktop, and you have your little icons here. And you're trying to find the origin of an icon. And you're like, okay, so we're going to pick up the graphics and pixels and blah, blah, blah. And like this methodology of trying to find out the origin of an interface, assuming that in the past it was the same interface, it just kind of developed in a kind of a linear fashion and expanded, as if, like, for instance, your entire desktop with like the thousands icons you have in there is the result of one little icon multiplying, interacting with itself, and then, it reached the status of your modern interface. When we all know that's not the case. We all know we went through MS-DOS, we went through text-based, interfaces, things that are completely unrelated to the icon, and you would never be able to deduce, looking at MS-DOS, that the future will be icons. Never. And this may be difficult to understand, but it's exactly the same for life. The aspect, the form that life takes to us is just an interface. It is just a symbolic representation for something that is deeper than its form. So in essence, life takes the form of a living cell now with this current interface that we're having, and it evolved out of something that did not necessarily have the form of a living cell like billions of years ago. We give it that form because humans have that kind of way of looking at reality. And so one might ask, okay, well, great, but how do you reverse engineer life then? How do you actually drill down to understand what's beyond the interface? And there you'll have to watch some of my other videos, but I'll just do a quick recap here. So the one and most important thing to understand is that life is just a kind of algorithm, even though I don't like to call it an algorithm, but let's just say it's just non-determinism. Non-determinism, and that's it. It's basically, you can also say it's like an interference. I like to call it also an interference pattern. So let's dig deeper into all these three kind of concepts. So again, if you watched all my videos, you know that all that exists is basically just pure vibrations. But since for every vibration, there's necessarily a vibration of opposite phase, everything cancels itself out, and we're back to zero or nothingness. Then zero or nothingness interacts with itself, which enters back into vibrations, which cancel each other out. And so it's this quantum foam kind of thing where energy appears spontaneously out of the void because of the void interacting with itself, kind of. It's like the void meeting the void, not knowing how to interact with the void, and temporarily creates this kind of imbalance or whatever, which we would call a manifestation of energy. But since nothing can be created which does not have its opposite, especially if it's the form of vibrations, because for every vibration that exists, then a vibration of opposite phase necessarily exists. And since there is no time at that point, then all vibrations necessarily meet almost instantaneously their vibrations of opposite phase, and that cancel each other out, goes back to void. And so the whole point is, how do you separate between those two? Like, how do you break this switcheroo between infinity and zero, basically, that, flicker between each other at infinite speed? And the one way you can do that is specifically with an interference pattern, which is you create a kind of a strategy or a form or something that discriminates and picks out like a part of this vibration and not the other. And so if you look at one of my very early videos, I just give this example of, like, for instance, you have two wave patterns that are exactly the same, and they're opposite phase, one to each other. Then you assign a knob to each one of these sound waves, and let's say this is a cut knob. And then you take your hands and you just randomly just twist them. And by doing that, suddenly the sound reappears. Whereas if you play them and they're of opposite phase, all you hear is silence, because for every crest there's a peak, and for every peak there's a crest, and they basically cancel each other out. But if you modulate the sound, then you obtain, well, something and not nothing. And so life is that kind of thing. Life is kind of a form or a way of like limiting consciousness or whatever to look into infinity and discriminate between this perfect symmetry and look at things asymmetrically, where you have a little bit more energy on one side than the other. And that's what creates our reality. This experience that we're having is because of life. So life is the very first thing that appears. It is actually essential for a universe or a reality made up of experiences such as this one. Because before life, all of the other elements in our reality respond to laws that are very predictable, that you can map into a formula. And any of the quantum kind of features that we see in the behavior of matter is the effect of life. That is, because there is life in the universe, it behaves in a quantum kind of way, and this quantum kind of rules for physicality is just the properties of life that we're discovering, that imbues matter with quantum properties because of its non-deterministic or nature, or its kind of interference, pattern or behavior. I don't know how to call them. There's not really a satisfactory term at this point. But how does life acquire the form of a living cell, and how does it kind of work? So the first thing is, you remember that I had this micro to macro kind of thing, where the universe structures itself out of vibrations into octaves. Naturally. So octaves, it's this idea of how to break perfect symmetry from the macro to the micro. So infinity, zero. Basically, infinity and zero are collapsed onto each other, and then as they separate, they create intermediary forms between zero and infinity. And here you would have photons. And well, first of all, this is like 0 and infinity. And first, before photons, actually, you have vibrations or sound. Here you have multiverse made up of sound. But a multiverse which cannot be said as multi because it's just a big sort of, how should I say, mush of vibrations. The micro, there's just one vibration. At the macro, it becomes like an infinitely big kind of plane where you're filled with just chaotic vibrations all over the place. Then you step up a little bit here and you have light or photons, which is just a torus or a way to wrap vibrations in a kind of a toroidal fashion so that you avoid perfect symmetry. It's again a strategy to avoid perfect symmetry, you see? Because here, if for every vibration there's a vibration of opposite phase, you can temporarily escape perfect symmetry by wrapping vibrations around each other like in this kind of toroidal fashion, like a black hole basically, and they just go like this. And you avoid perfect symmetry. And then stepping down from the multiverse, you have universe. And now, because now you have these different steps here, so universe and photons. So you have a universe is basically a self-contained pocket of light, or the first black hole, you could say. And now the multiverse can be an interconnection of universes made up of light. But before, it was just a big mush of vibrations all over the place, chaotic. But since you now have a new structure to structure it, now the universe can be an interconnected kind of mesh of, the multiverse can be an interconnected mesh of multiple universes, which are just self-contained pockets of light with no particular form. Stepping up again, you have quarks. And stepping down from universe, you have galactic clusters. Which are like these pockets of light within pockets of light, you could say. And that's linked. Then you have subparticles, which is proton, neutron. An electron is kind of weird because it is kind of like on the fence here. But anyways, and here you have galaxies. So this is linked. Then you have atoms. And here you have solar systems. This is linked. And then you have molecules. Oops. I'm running out of space. And planets. And you can see that these two are linked as well. So this is kind of the mirror, like stepping down from infinity, you have all these forms stepping up. And this is more intuitive because obviously you know that planets are basically giant balls of unconscious chemistry, and molecules are chemistry. Atoms and solar systems have a similar pattern to them with this gravitation of like these protons and electrons gravitating around the nucleus, where you have planets orbiting around the sun. So there are some elements here of parallel between micro and macro, but this is how it goes. And if you count this, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 notes. Or octaves, you could also say. But you have 12 notes in the scale. And so if everything is made up of vibrations, it makes sense that the different layers or levels of reality would be 12. Because you can create only something stable out of 12 notes in terms of harmony, in terms of the interaction or the patterns or the interactions between energy or reality in the form of vibrations. It's like an alphabet. If you use the certain alphabet, there's a certain number of words that you can construct. If you use vibrations as the elementary building block for the universe, then in order for them to not interfere or to have a positive kind of harmonious interaction between themselves, they have to arrange themselves in these 12 notes, which is the natural way of preventing dissonance. And now right in the middle here, between everything is life. Life is in the middle between nothing and everything. It is what sits in the center between zero and infinity. But you understand that life then is what? What form does it take? Something between the molecule and the planet. But understand that it's like both a planet that becomes alive, and an entire planet that becomes alive, and a molecule that becomes alive as well. So it's something really, really strange. And ultimately, don't forget that none of this has a form, ultimately. All it is, ultimately, is just vibrations within vibrations within vibrations, a kind of a way to create interference within, it's just information contained within information. You know what I mean? So it's as if the only thing was strategies to break out of perfect symmetry, and they only take the form that we see, where like galaxies being these spinning things or whatever, because we are building that interface from within the experience, but ultimately does not have a form, an inherent form. And that's what's really, really difficult to understand, is that this is just pure information with no form attached to it. And so life is something that sits between the molecule and the planet and does not have a form, but acquires form gradually as it enters into an experience. It's as if the whole planet was alive. And when you see like a cell dividing in two and then interacting with itself, it's actually almost as if the entire planet was interacting with itself. It's like I'll try to give you some examples here. Imagine that this is the same as the focus effect of a camera. You know, when you focus a camera, originally, like everything is there. Everything is there, but it's blurry. You don't really see anything. It's like the forms are dissolved. And as you sharpen the image, it becomes clearer and clearer and clearer. So the origins of life is when things were very blurred. It's like if life didn't know what it looked like in the beginning, and then as it sort of experienced things, as it entered into this experience and interacted with itself, then it gave itself a more definite form, which is the best form to pursue the experience moving forward. And so it could have been something completely different in the beginning. And then it changed as it sort of evolved. And so that's what's really difficult to understand, is that ultimately we are giving information that is just pure information here, that just like vibrations within vibrations within vibrations. We're giving them a form so that we can interact with reality in a very intuitive way. But it's just like the notes on the piano. Okay, that's almost like a better example. So I'm telling you that these are like 12 notes. But then with 12 notes, it's just like scales, basically. It's just octaves or something like that. That doesn't give you experience. That doesn't give you a symphony or a piano piece. But with these building blocks, then you can build a piano piece, for instance, play something like a symphony or whatever, and that's the form. But you shouldn't be hung up on that, because it could be anything else. Like out of 12 notes, you can construct so many different things, and they can take so many different forms. So it's almost like you listen to a symphony of Beethoven and you assume that's the reality. It's constructed out of 12 notes, and you're just obsessed with the chord progression, and you think that like this chord progression that advances is like, going from past to future, and you're trying to analyze all of that when none of that really matters. And so don't forget here that life, as it starts from, sits between 0 and infinity, basically as it experiences anything at all. It's like a tree, basically. It grows into the future and then it plunges its roots into the past. Like this is the ground. The ground is basically, wherever life began. And then it plunges its roots into the past, which is, it gives a form to what we call today physics, what we call chemistry, basically any kind of science that is below life or before life is also shaped by life's experience and sort of cements itself or takes a definite form through this experience. And the future, which is humans, thought, or animals, sorry, egregores, ETs, you name it. All the things that are afterlife are kind of like the leaves on a tree, And that also kind of, it's like the future is being unraveled or shaped at the same time as the past, basically. And so it's a very strange kind of thing where this life kind of grows and expands in terms of its experiences, and the more it grows in an eternal present, it's like the eternal present basically expands and swallows up what we think of as the past and the future as it goes. And so this eternal present becomes simply more and more vast, as in it was experienced through life. And what's outside of this circle is simply something that is not being experienced in the physical or in a life kind of form. It's like something that is nonlinear here. Anything that is like outside of these circles is in a nonlinear time. And the whole point of the universe is to experience all of itself in a linear fashion. And that's just life expanding, but it expands into the past and into the future simultaneously, swallowing up anything that is nonlinear and putting it into a linear form. Oof. It's coming to me as I go, so sorry if I have any kind of hiccups here. And it's blowing my own mind, which often happens. What else can I say here? Yeah, I wanted to say that, like in the Bible, in Genesis, or whether it's the New Testament, I can't remember, but it said like in the beginning, like God basically separated the firmament from the land or whatever, and then it says, if I remember correctly, God's face was upon the water, or God's spirit or something like that. And that's really fascinating because it suggests specifically that, to me, at least that's how I interpret it, that life is the very first thing that appears. Because it talks about the water, and it talks about God's spirit or God's face that is in the water. Now we know that life emerged in the water. And so it's almost as if the water is the first thing that appears, and then life builds around that. And says, okay, but where's the water? Maybe it should be on a planet. And where's that planet? Maybe it should be in a solar system because I need heat, and so I'll create a sun and blah, 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 blah. But obviously, these are just forms that it gives to octaves or vibrations or these kind of layers that are there, but that are formless. That means they don't have a particular appearance. They don't have a form. So it's as if all the ones and zeros, all the combinations of ones and zeros exist, but since no one is there to give them any meaning, they're meaningless. And then gradually, through life as a kind of a non-deterministic mechanism, it gives meaning to all kinds of strings of ones and zeros that already exist in order to create an interface where it can have an experience. Here, it's more like notes that are at its disposal, and then it sort of constructs a symphony. But don't forget, it constructs a symphony into the past and into the future. It's like life sits in the middle, and then there's like the whole thing like before life, and it's like, okay, physics, chemistry, and then also something after life here, and then it says like, okay, ETs, and Jesus and angels. And that's what it does. And like the whole symphony sort of stretches out into the past, out into the future. And life is just like plunging its roots in here to sort out the past, to put it in a linear form, and also sorts out the future by growing into the future. And like I think it's 2 episodes back where I'm saying that basically every time a human has a thought, it goes and uncovers in a nonlinear fashion everything that springs from that thought. And so that's, for instance, life's strategy of how life kind of can explore the future in a nonlinear fashion in order to sort of already pre-shape it and then swallow it gradually into a linear fashion through to something like the human. So a human thinks of something, it reverberates into a nonlinear fashion into infinity. There it sort of explores all the different timelines that can spring from that thought, like the thought of a nuclear weapon, and there's one of those that is dead end because it's humanity self-destructing in a winter, like a nuclear winter apocalypse, and one where we use it for energy, and that's the one that, like, okay, that's the one we should pursue, and then you attach that linear story to humanity's experience in a linear fashion, and there you integrate gradually all of these things, and that's how life sort of swallows up the entire reality or infinity into a linear fashion through experience. And so that's the ultimate goal, I think. Like, it's basically life swallowing up infinity through the experience of infinity, gradually nibbling on infinity and swallowing up everything that's in there. One thing that I like as a quote, maybe you can quote me in saying that because I haven't found it anywhere, is that a thought cannot be less intelligent than the thinker. Which means every time you have a thought, your thought is as intelligent as you are. It inherits your intelligence, quote unquote. And that's how it explores all of these different timelines instantly or very quickly in a nonlinear fashion, because it has your intelligence. It's as if it were your double. It's as if you created a double of yourself in an energetic form or a non-physical form. It had your intelligence, but it was only worried or concentrated or focused on the unraveling all of the potential things that could unravel from a thought that you had. For instance, you're thinking about buying a Lamborghini or something, and you create a double of yourself that goes and explores all the different timelines of you having that Lamborghini and what springs of it. Like, you kill yourself in a car accident, or you go bankrupt, or you get it stolen, or whatever. Doesn't really matter. And then it comes back and informs you to say, well, actually, in your linear timeline, maybe better to actually just buy, a Volkswagen or something, because you're not ready to handle it, or there's just so many different timelines where it's not a pleasant experience. And so that's how this kind of happens. And so life is bound to reach a sort of a humanoid kind of form, because it is the only way that it can continue to expand into nonlinearity through humans and through thought and access the world of thought, the realm of thought, the realm of ideas or whatever. And you can think of in an early universe when life was very, very young, you can think of that as all dimensions basically being, well, let's go like this, collapsed into one. And as life kind of experiences things, these dimensions separate. So here life appears, and that's your stories of mythology, dragons, unicorns, ETs, whatever, like Elohim, angels, you name it. Because life then kind of, because it's very young, it's just mixing up anything that can be built from these octaves, almost as if they were condensed, and you would have a mumble jumble of everything. And that's what happens in the Bible, where, you have, many kind of things in like ancient Greece. You had these weird creatures that were half human, half animal, and centaurs and whatever. And then as this experience, as life experience expands, then it sort of sorts things into the right dimensions. So you'd have like the human would be here, the animals would be here, and like the planets and the seas, and like the chemistry would be here, and the physics would be here, and like physics just bumping into each other like big clouds of gas, and you'd have like different portals between these different realms. Like you'd have the star, which would be here, which is kind of like an evolved form of chemistry, and the bridge between chemistry and the physics and chemistry. And here you have like life would remain in this center here, and from this center it would further expand here and sort things, and saying, okay, well, unicorns and all that stuff, that's in the world of thought. Let's put them here because that's where they belong. They can't really exist in our realm, and dragons as well. And how about angels? That would be another plane. That would be like over here. And it sorts things. And now, in order to go from one realm into another, you have to build bridges. You have to build things or something that connects them. And the human is obviously the bridge between the physical kind of reality and the world of thought. And we are already manifesting ideas into our reality. It's just that we give ourselves certain strategies to do that. Like, for instance, if we want to manifest a unicorn, it will take us, it would require us to have this very deep understanding and knowledge and mastery over DNA and biology to, manipulate the DNA of horses for them to grow a horn in the middle of their head or something. And that's the form that we've chosen to sort of bring that into a linear experience, the unicorn into a linear experience, where maybe in the past it was here, but it already existed in physical reality. But because life was very young, it was not very smart in how to mix these kind of dimensions, and it had a bad experience of mixing all these things. It didn't create a coherent experience. It didn't allow for, this whole story to expand further. And so it sort of sorts things into their relevant dimensions, so to speak, in order for this experience, this to broaden and to be larger and larger. And this is basically your linear time, because here it's like the past, here it's like the future. And so the future and the past basically expand simultaneously into nonlinearity and swallow them up, Like right now, if you're talking about the fact that before the Big Bang, there was another universe that collapsed and blah, 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 that takes that into an idea of the multiverse or of several universes existing before ours in the past. And that's a way for life, again, to swallow up more of the past, quote unquote past, obviously, into this linearity, because this expands, this right here. So I hope now you have a better idea about the origins of life. Basically, life is the mix between a consciousness that goes from infinity towards zero and has to limit itself into compressing itself, so to speak, into becoming, into espousing the form of a living cell, and also a consciousness that goes from zero to infinity and has to remember all the forms that has been, the big, like bigger and bigger, and embrace like the form of the atom, of the molecule, and whatever. And then these two consciousnesses mingle and mix. And that's what imbues, that's what breathes a life and consciousness into a living cell. It's two consciousnesses marrying in the middle, in the center. One that it goes from infinity towards zero, one that goes from zero and expands into infinity. They meet at that crossroads, and that's what life is this mix between those two consciousnesses that managed to mix in such a way that they create this kind of interference pattern break out of perfect symmetry. And life initially without a form, but then as these two consciousnesses kind of mixed into this and had their first experiences, then gradually everything sort of comes into focus, like this kind of sharpening effect of a camera. And the form becomes more and more apparent. So it's this idea of the universe being self-organizing. Again, I think that's nothing new. It's just that it's going to be very hard to reverse engineer what actual form life had before, like when it had its first experience, its very, very first experience. The more it interacted with itself, the more all our reality, past to future, came into focus. And now it's so focused that we believe that this structuring right now that we see is the truth. And that this past is the truth. But in fact, it's this that is really mysterious, that we'll never really be able to pinpoint or find out. So again, I hope you found this interesting. Don't forget to like, share, comment if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you in the next video.